Sinclètica Monastic School will start, this is a launching of the school that we are doing, it will start with a master's program. And the master's program will function in a monthly basis with blocks which are weekend blocks. So we have from October until June, every month, one weekend that will be devoted to one specific topic. And I'll be telling you right away which ones will be those topics. The master's is a 2-year master's with 120 credits, and so we'll have 9 topics on the first year, monthly topics from October to June, and 9 topics on the second year. In total, 18 topics that are all of them inspired in the Rule of Benedict, but the program is not confessional, meaning that the Rule of Benedict, and in general all the monastic experience, is an experience that goes into the depth of what being human means. And some have called that the archetypal human, this monastic quest. And so, yes, in this case it's been inspired by the rule, because that's what we live here at the monastery, but it goes beyond the rule. And you will see right away when I tell you the topics that those are not topics that anybody can appropriate, not the Rule of Benedict, not Christian monachism or any other tradition. Because we start with know yourself as the first step necessary for this spiritual quest. That's the first topic of the first year, know yourself. The second, well, I must tell you that the topics of the second year are thought as a deepening of the topics of the first year. So that if the first topic of the first year is know yourself, the first topic of the second year, which is understood as a deepening of knowing yourself, is the topic of suffering. Suffering as something that we don't desire, that we don't wish anybody to go through, but it is true that when you experience suffering, there is something that grows in the person. So suffering as a way to really open your eyes to some aspects of your own personality that otherwise would maybe remain unconscious. After knowing yourself, we move into the topic of love, because the idea is, if we know ourselves, we discover something, which is when we love and feel loved, we don't have questions about what is it that we are doing in the world, because we actually experience a type of fulfillment or a type of adequacy between what we desire and what we are experiencing. So love is our second topic, and I'll go a bit quicker with the topics now. What deepens love in the second year is freedom. Third topic after love, grace. Grace is understood as I have been loved first. Grace is understanding that I'm not the source of love, but I have been given something freely, grace. I am invited to give it also freely. Of course, it's a big theological topic, the topic of grace. But for people, and some of the professors, as you also will see, are not believers, but they are, many of them, artists. And artists, in general, they feel something it's called inspiration. And inspiration, it means that you cannot tell an artist, okay, will you produce your work of art tomorrow, the day after tomorrow, in a week, in a month? Artists have to answer, well, I'll be working in that direction, but I'll have to also wait for something called inspiration. I have to feel inspired to do it. And I don't have a switch in me that can force the creativity or the work of art. In that sense, it's possible to understand the topic of grace as an opening to something that's beyond us, but it's benevolent towards us, is something, is a gift, is something that will be given to me. The topic of grace will be deepened on the second year by the topic of truth. What is truth is a huge question that has been addressed from so many perspectives, but we'll work on it under this link with grace. After grace comes the topic of humility, because humility is understood not as a lack of assertivity, not as bringing yourself down unnecessarily, not as letting others to bring yourself down, but understood as knowing that your place in the world is not the center stage, that we are not, each of us, the center of the world, and behaving accordingly. Saint Teresa of Avila said, to be humble is to walk in the truth. So in that sense, we'll be treating and dealing with the topic of humility. And in the second year, the deepening of humility will be the topic of prayer. And again, prayer is another huge topic for believers. How that can be understood when one is approaching it from a non-believer perspective would be understanding that this benevolent aspect of life which we studied under the topic of grace, it's not something that comes to me only in a passive way. It's also that I can also demand actively. That's what we do when we pray. We ask for these good things to happen. So you can also have an attitude that even, as I said, if you don't belong to a religious tradition, you can interact with the world and you can interact with your daily reality in an active way, expecting and asking for something positive. After the topic of humility, we then arrive at the center of the program. And the center of the program is the topic of silence. What deepens the topic of silence on the second year is joy, the deep joy of the heart. After that, we go into the 4 last topics. After silence, not before, comes the word. After what deepens the word is meaning. And after the word, not before, comes community. What deepens the community? Community is understood as the community of people with whom I live or with whom I share my queries and my life. A community that is of human size. But the deepening of that human-sized community is the universal community. And not only the community with all human beings, but also, you'll see it in the program, will be professors specialized in something called, for example, animal theology. And that means there is also this aspect of communion, deep communion and belonging with all nature and also with, of course, the animals. So what is understood under this idea of community at its fullness? After community, something without which there is no community that can prevail, and that is forgiveness. What deepens forgiveness on the second year is innocence, or you'll see some professors will also be calling that virtue. Or you could also call it purity of heart. What is this? And finally, we come to the final topic of the first year, and that's the topic of fulfillment. And here comes the question. If we arrive at fulfillment at the end of the first year, what is it that we are going to do on the second year and can deepen the fulfillment? Well, the final topic of the second year, which is the one that deepens fulfillment and also the last topic of our itinerary of these 2 years of the master's program, is the topic of solitude. And solitude, for the monastic tradition, is not conceived as something negative, something to avoid, but something to welcome, something to embrace. Solitude understood as the deepening of an aspect that is irreducible, an aspect of my life that is not possible to share, one could say not even with God, because it's from where I interact with God and with other human beings and with, as we said, creation in general, is the irreducible place that gives me my ultimate identity as distinctive from anybody else. But how to experience that in relationship to fulfillment is how we will finish our program.